one of those things when we talk about follow-up is obviously the action of following up with a lead, with a seller, with a client. Could be contractors, right? Just external people that are have a piece and a part to play within the deal. And dude, we made a jump, and you can look at it in a couple different ways. That task is either something that can be, to an extent, automated, and in some cases automated in terms of a text message or an email or stuff like that. But there always needs to be an action on our side taken in order for that to happen, whether it's setting up the automation or making the actual text or the phone call or the email by ourselves. And we've got what I would say is pretty much the best ever in our businesses, especially in our CRM follow-up process that we've had over the past, 5-6 years.
Hey, welcome back to the Pursuit of Property podcast. I'm sitting here with my co-host, Cade Barrett. We are sitting, what time is it? It's 12 o'clock on a Tuesday. It's warm in Fresno. Cade, how are you feeling?
Dude, it is very hot. We've had, on the business side, we've had a ton of the tenants and the rental properties we manage, a bunch of AC issues. We've sent our AC technician to probably 40 plus errands across the board with a bunch of ACs, either not being able to keep up with the heat, ACs going out. I know friends and family, the same stuff is happening to. My parents just had to get a new AC installed. Yeah, dude, this heat wave's freaking gnarly, bro.
Yeah, it's been hot. How about in South Bend?
Oh, yeah. We had a wonderful update on South Bend weather. Following up our episode on Airbnb. South Bend, on the other hand, crazy windstorms, hail, rain, tornado warnings. Like, weather out there was crazy. Basement partially flooded out there. Luckily, we were on it really quick with some of our boots on the ground, but just some crazy weather going on all over the place.
Man, it's the end times.
Well, we're talking, Fresno, Clovis, South Bend. I'm looking at our maps behind you. Every single place dealing with some subpar weather. But, here we are.
And here we are in the heat doing a pod.
There it is.
Let's jump into it. We're talking today about the famous saying, fortune is in the follow-up. We're going to dive in a little bit about how our team handles staying on top of the projects we have. Over the last few months, we've seen a lot smoother transition from like new lead to a signed deal to a fixed project to a sold project. And I think a lot of that comes back to just really good system and process of communication with the team.
Yeah, 100%. And one of those things when we talk about follow-up is obviously the action of following up with a lead, with a seller, with a client. Could be contractors, right? Just external people that are have a piece and a part to play within the deal. And dude, we made a jump, and you can look at it in a couple different ways. That task is either something that can be, to an extent, automated, and in some cases automated in terms of a text message or an email or stuff like that. But there always needs to be an action on our side taken in order for that to happen, whether it's setting up the automation or making the actual text or the phone call or the email by ourselves. And we've got what I would say is pretty much the best ever in our businesses, especially in our CRM follow-up process that we've had over the past, 5-6 years.
Yeah, for our own business. I bet there are guys that have something even more dialed, but just looking at the versions of follow-up systems we've had, I think we're at currently our best version to date.
Absolutely.
And it's constantly changing. So if you're listening to this podcast in a year from now, things have likely changed, but we wanted to just share kind of how our team's handling it right now. And hopefully the newer people in the business who are trying to get their feet, grounded and try to have some concrete tasks, hopefully this podcast is going to give you some value.
Yeah. And this isn't going to be a CRM podcast, but when we talk about task management, the CRM is the hub for all of that for us. We've talked about Re Simpli before. Re Simpli is the CRM we transitioned to at the beginning of the year. And all of our follow-up systems are within our CRM. That's because all of our leads are in the CRM. All of our active deals in escrow to purchase are in the CRM. And then everything we've already closed on and active projects where we are following up with external vendors is in the CRM. So all of this for us is housed within Re Simpli.
Yeah. Taking a step back, I mean, if you look at our business, it's a marketing and sales business, and you just can't keep track of all the leads you're going to be talking to. And if you can currently keep track of all the leads you're talking to, then you're probably not talking to enough people yet, right? So
for sure,
if you're on a budget and you don't have any money to spend on a CRM, we have a very basic Excel CRM, right? Where it's just an Excel sheet where you're writing down property addresses, people's names, phone numbers, and then notes taken in conversations. And the last part of that is what your next task is, right? So I think it's important for you to, if you're going to listen to this podcast, to have some kind of a system to even take note, because otherwise this podcast probably won't make sense.
Dude, I'm curious. I think what would be helpful is we had a turning point a little bit after we started with Re Simpli. There was a turning point in terms of our follow-up and our follow-up processes and improving it to, like you said, at this moment in time, having it be the best version we've ever had. But there was a tipping point over the past few months that let us get to where we are. And I think before we talk about what that tipping point was, you are obviously in tune with the sales process, the sales team who are handling a lot of follow-up on the lead side. What did it look like before we introduced some of that automation and kind of that tipping point? What did that really look like for you guys in terms of follow-up on the lead side for within the CRM?
Yeah, it was kind of mayhem. The biggest thing that I noticed was that nothing was in one centralized location. And so, so you and I are in a conversation, we're talking about 123 Main Street. That could have just been a conversation we had and no notes were taken, no updates were posted. And if they were, they could be in Slack, they could have been on Podio, they could have been in a group text somewhere, they could have been on a post-it note, right? The problem with that is as we've done more deals, we have more people, we didn't have a way to reference. Like if I was out of the office, Cade couldn't step in and make a call for me because he wouldn't know what the hell was going on, or he may not even know that somebody's supposed to call that person on that day, right? So it was kind of pandemonium. And again, I think the biggest single issue we had was just not a centralized place to find the information that is important for that next call or the next appointment or whatever you're doing.
Yeah. And the cool thing within our CRM, when we're making those phone calls or sending those texts, we don't really use a ton of email follow-up. It's mainly just phone calls and texts. Finding that centralized hub within Re Simpli is, okay, opening up a lead, opening up a seller. The really cool thing is all of the calls are recorded. All of the outgoing and incoming text messages are recorded. So like you said, just moving and having that centralized system allowed us to now, okay, Scott's out of the office. Scott can assign Cade a task to follow up with this seller when he's out. And me, I can log in. Okay, here was Scott's last recorded conversation with the seller. Here's kind of the text messages that went on before or after that. And I can step in and have a really good gauge of not only why am I following up, but I can also do my research within that system to be able to step in and provide a little bit of value and not have it just be someone brand new, knowing nothing about the seller, nothing about their situation. I can step in and provide and build a little bit of rapport of my own because I know what's been going on.
Yeah. And again, if you don't have a team and it's just you and you're at the start of your career, it's better to get these habits now because we have team members, even currently it's a learning curve to learn how to work in an organization. And if you're aspiring to create a lifestyle where you're not working all the time, you're going to have to hire. And when you hire, those people are going to need to know what your next step is. And another valuable point to this is if you have a coach or if you are a coach, right, you can go back and show examples of real life deals that make sense. Or if you're somebody who has a mentor, you can take all the notes to your mentor and they're not going to get the 5-minute pitch on it. They can read through 3-4 weeks of follow-up and say, okay, well, it looked like it was really hot at this point, and then you did these things and then it changed and now you can't get a hold of the seller. They kind of get a timeline versus I talked to the seller, things were great, and then all of a sudden they stopped talking to me. Well, usually somebody with some more experience may be able to diagnose what happened or have an idea of how to get it back.
And not only getting external feedback, not only prepping yourself for when you are growing and building your team, but it also just helps you. We're all human. If you've been following up with a lead for even a year, 6 months, 3 months, I can barely even remember what happened last week, dude. So if you're working by yourself, to be able to have that track record to go back and see, okay, I'm keeping diligent notes, or I've got the call recording of all of this important information with the seller. I'm learning family members' names, dogs' names, what's going on with the house. 3 months down the line, it can be really hard to remember all of that stuff. And when in the name of the game of follow-up, you need to be able to set yourself apart from the hundreds of other phone calls these sellers and these leads are getting from other people. So I think just having that there for your own value to help you on your calls, even if you're still starting off by yourself, is huge.
What's funny that we're even talking about it. It's not task related, but like even moments before the podcast, I got a call from an unknown number.
Yeah.
The guy knew me. I didn't know the guy off the top of my head. He referenced a street name, and then I was able to quickly go to my CRM, pull up the street name, and boom, there he is. And here's all the notes of like when I met with him last. This was like what I said the comps were for his home at the time. Went through everything. I don't have to redo that research. I can now just update, right?
Yeah. And what were you saying? Like 3 years?
Yeah,
in the making?
Yeah, like it's been a long time.
Literally case in point right
Last
there.
conversation was 18 months ago.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about tasks, right? And when we're talking about tasks, we're only using that term because that's what our CRM refers to it as. A task, like Cade said, could be a text, a call, a door knock, a letter in the mail, an email, a voicemail, a pop by. There's a lot of different things, but we're going to use the word task just to refer to the next activity involving that lead, right? So step one, you need to make sure that every time you pick up a lead, right, and you do something, that you take a note of what you did and you schedule the next task. If you get nothing else from this conversation, it's every time you talk to a seller, no matter what the outcome was, you set a follow-up task, right? That's step one.
Plain and simple.
Podcast is over. I'm just kidding. So, for example, Cade calls me off of a direct mail. Step one in this case, answer the inbound call and have a conversation. Cade may say, I'm interested. Great. Everybody knows what to do in that situation. They may say, I'm not interested. Then, okay, when would you be interested? Or if not now, maybe down the road or maybe later. I'm trying to think of what the script says. Okay, not right now, maybe a little later. See if they give you any kind of a response about down the road. And then say Cade says 6 months. Cade, what do you do?
Oh, you automatically, if I'm telling you 6 months, I'm cutting that in half down to 3 months at least.
Bare minimum.
Right? Because someone's not going to remember. If they tell you, call me in 6 months, 9.9 out of 10 people are not going to remember if you call them in 3 months, that 3 months ago they told you to call them in 6 months, and they're going to be all pissed you called them 3 months early.
Yep. So step one, set a follow-up call. We suggest if a seller gives you a timeline, we suggest you cut it in half. The only time that doesn't really make sense is if it's like in a day, right?
Yeah.
If they say, call me on Tuesday and it's Sunday, probably don't call them on Monday unless they had no reason for it to be Tuesday, right? And if they have no reason for it to be Tuesday, you should clarify that on the phone and say, Tuesday? See what they say. And if they say, yeah, I'm meeting with my kid, or yeah, I have to meet with my accountant, great. Wait until Tuesday. If they say, yeah, I just want to sleep on it. Okay, do you mind if I give you a call tomorrow afternoon? Right? If they say no again, then you can push it on.
And let me know the importance of this too. Obviously, one thing that pops into my head is just sitting in and listen to a lot of the sales team's calls is you start to learn what a lead best responds to. Are you getting more answers and connects with them if you give them a call, or are they ignoring your calls and responding very, very well on text? I mean, I think the other week I heard you pose it as a question to one of the leads. You were like, it sounds like, the best way to get a hold of you is to set, a specific day and time to call back and not really call you on the fly or call you during work hours or whatever. You set the label, you set the statement, and then the lead reaffirm that and confirm that with you. So if you recognize and you confirm that a lead really prefers text over getting calls and you get better response with that lead on text, when you're setting up that next follow-up, usually you'd want to set it to be a text. You want to get the most amount of response you can from a lead. And if they're most responsive and prefer one way over the other, listen to your lead and do that.
Yeah, calls are the best because there's tonality, there's hesitation. You can tell more about a seller's motivation over a call. But you're exactly right. There's no point in calling a seller every day for a week if they don't answer their call. And not only that, you're wasting your time, right? Like, not only are you probably pestering them, you're wasting your own time. Recommendation in that situation. If I'm calling Cade every day and Cade's not answering, step one is to see, in the past, when did I normally connect with Cade? Was it in the mornings? Was it in the afternoons? Was it later at night? Was it on the weekends? And set a call during one of the time frames that you've reached Cade before and had a good conversation, right? Step two is, if you've gone 2 or 3 days and you haven't reached this person, you've probably gone too far. After the first call, and this isn't every call. Again, I have a hard time with this because sales is not a 1 + 1 = 2. Very often it's 1 + 2 = 4. It doesn't make perfect sense. But in this example, if I'm trying to call Cade and he's not answering, a very natural thing to do would be to either leave a voicemail or shoot a text. In my experience, if it's a mobile phone, I find it's always better to send a text, right? So I'll call Cade. He won't answer. Maybe we were supposed to connect after a week. And so we connect last week on Tuesday at the podcast. He says, hey, just call me next week. So I call him exactly a week later. He doesn't answer. I shoot a quick text. Hey, Cade, it's Scott. Reference something from the past conversation. Mention that you were thinking about your offers, but you hadn't made a decision, and shoot that off. Just leave it at that. Reminding them that you had a conversation. I may put at the end, like, you asked me to give you a call in a week, just following back up with you.
Yep.
If I don't hear from Cade within a couple hours, I'll just shoot him a follow-up text. Let me know, ... I swear that text is like a magical spell. Like, people just respond to let me know ... If Cade doesn't respond to that, maybe I shoot him a call the next day at a different time, right? Like, if Cade didn't answer at 12:20 on a Tuesday, I'm not going to call him at 12:20 on a Wednesday because there's probably a reason he didn't answer. Maybe I shoot him a call before work, like maybe 8 o'clock, or maybe I shoot him a call later in the afternoon. I found the most influential calls happen around like 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock at night. I'll hit him a call at like 4:30. Hey man, supposed to connect yesterday, didn't reach you. Just checking in to see I made you an offer last week, right? So that's kind of the expectation there. Again, we're talking about task management. The way that would look would be, I talk with Cade on Tuesday. I set a follow-up call in a week. Once I get to Tuesday, I check off my follow-up call. I put a note, called, no answer, texted. Then I set a new follow-up call. Or, excuse me, I set up a follow-up task. Let me know, ... for 3 hours later. Then Wednesday, I set a follow-up call for 4:30 p.m. I do that all in one sitting, so then I don't have to think about it on Friday if I go, oh shit, did I ever call Cade back?
Yeah.
I know every day I log in, if I go to my tasks, if I just do those tasks and I set up a follow-up task after that, my week will be made for me, right? You don't have to juggle. For our team right now, we're managing like 60 leads at a time. I don't have to keep track of 60 leads. All I have to keep track of is every time I do a task, I put a new task.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And I feel like for a lot of newer investors, right? We've preached this, we learned this way, right? Is setting up your schedule and your calendar and follow up / lead generation, making your calls, however you want to term it, needing to be a set chunk of your day every single day. And we started in the business going, all right, lead generation and follow up is 9 to 11 every single day, minimum 2 hours. We're setting up our calendar 9 to 11, Monday through Friday. You made a good point where there's a batch of people who will respond really well to that time frame. But the issue of just setting and forgetting that block of 2 hours is, like you said, another very important time and a very responsive time is that afternoon, that 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock. So there's not, you need to be flexible with your calendar and with your schedule. It can go against maybe what you've learned or what you've thought about, where in sales, 1 + 1 does not always equal 2. You need to have the flexibility to make the call when needed. If you're not getting your responses in the 9 to 11 time frame, look back, see when you've been able to get in contact with them. But you also need to set aside some of that chunk of the afternoon, because if you're not getting a lot of responses in the morning and you're trying again, you're spinning your wheels, you go week after week after week, you're making all your calls in the morning and not getting any responses, not making any progress on leads, it may be time for you to sit back and think, okay, maybe let's shake this up a little bit and try to make some phone calls in the afternoon, because mornings just aren't doing it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And what we're talking about switching up the way you're contacting the seller, that also is important, right? Like, I found it to be that when a seller ghosts me, if I write a handwritten note card, very often they'll call me back. I didn't forget about you. I was busy on the days you called. I saw your little note card. Here's where I'm at. And even though they may not still be ready to make a decision, they are back kind of in rapport.
Yeah. I think, again, there's not a perfect science, but the most important thing in terms of the actual task itself is making sure you're keeping a record. And after every time you finish a task, whether that's making the attempt and being unsuccessful, or making the attempt and you have that phone call or you get that response, making those notes and making sure that no lead is ever without a task. Every single lead should always have a task. And this also goes to, I'll ask you, because it can also be hard, right? If you're setting your task for your future date, how do you prevent 40 follow-ups on Friday, but on Thursday, the day before, you've only got 2?
If you're working in bulk, it's naturally not going to happen, because the way I always do it is I try to do by calendar day. So like, leads will turn into certain days. I'll figure out which day is the easiest to reach somebody, and then I'll task it on that day. But they do happen. From time to time, I'll log in, I'll have maybe 10 follow-up tasks, and another day I may have 30, right? On the days that you have 10, if you're able to get your 10 done, start looking forward into the week and say, which tasks are not time sensitive to that specific day?
Yeah.
And if I had a lead say, call me in 3 weeks, they won't care if I call on Wednesday versus on Friday, right? So the benefit of doing this task system is that you can always look into your tasks on your CRM and say, oh, it looks like on Friday I'm going to be out half the day, but I've got 22 tasks. I'll just reassign them to earlier in the week. So what your question was if you are looking into, like, on certain days you have more than others, all you have to do is on your slow days, look forward into your calendar and say, are there any days this upcoming week that look really overloaded? And just start moving them forward, right?
And it helps mitigate the laziness, the inherent laziness that comes with follow-up. I've been guilty of it, right? It can be daunting when you've got one of those bigger days and maybe you've got more appointments that day scheduled. So it's easier just to say, well, shit, I've got 40 today. Let me just push back. Let me just push back 20 to the next day. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in this constant loop of pushing back tasks, reassigning tasks, to where that's where you lose out. If you were supposed to follow up with a lead last week and all of a sudden it's 2 weeks later and you've pushed back that task, 2 weeks is a long time for somebody else to step in, make that call, connect with the seller in a way that maybe you could have, but you push back the task, boom, now they're in contract with somebody else and you lose out on the deal.
I just had that happen. I just lost out on a deal in Tulare where that was the exact situation. I move a task by 2 days and she signed with somebody else. And you know what? Like, the blessing is I can see how many leads we have, and I know that I can't buy every property that we come across. It's unfortunate because I think that lead could have been decent, but at the end of the day, man, like, the reason I didn't make the tasks wasn't because I wasn't working. It was because I was working on other things, right? So speaking about that, when you get caught in a rut and you have a lot of tasks every day and it's like, I can't get caught up, I have personally found it to be the best to take a couple days and either do 2 or 3 days back to back where you stay a little later. Maybe you're used to going home at like 6, stay till 7. A lot of people answer their phone at 6. Or if you don't have that luxury, wake up on a Saturday. I swear Saturday mornings are so they crush, right? So you go into your home office or your office, call from like 9 to 11. You'll probably get 10 tasks done. It'll be less than normal, but each call that you make will go better, right? And at the end of the day, it's not about the number of tasks you get done. It was this conversation I just had with the team. If you had one really good conversation a day, you would have so many deals, right? I mean, it only takes one really good conversation. One really good conversation could lead to an appointment that gets you a deal. One really good conversation could get an offer accepted. One really good conversation could get an offer dispoed out, right? It's not about necessarily always the volume. It's about the quality that you can do at volume, right?
And let's talk about another solution to that problem too, because whether you're working by yourself or you have a team, there comes a point where that overwhelmingness and that number of follow-ups can start to get very hard to juggle. And you've got high priority leads. You've got leads that are on those longer term follow-ups, like we gave the example where I tell Scott to call me back in 6 months. That's vastly different than a lead who says, yeah, working through some stuff with the family. We're meeting on Saturday. Call me in a week, right? So a solution that we introduced was introducing a piece of automation into our follow-up that I think has definitely helped when we talk about these high priority leads. Helped a little bit, but the main value that this automation piece brings are to those leads who are either dead leads. You've gone a long amount of time without ever getting an answer from them, call, text, email, letter, nothing. Or those leads who are on this longer term follow-up, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. So we've had a lot of coaching students ask about it. We've seen huge success. This was the other piece I wanted to talk about in terms of follow-up. What did that automation piece look like when we introduced that into kind of our task management and follow-up system?
Yeah. And the software we're talking about, or the program we're talking about, is called OmniDrip. The benefit of it has been the ability to disconnect from leads without losing out, right? So the value is it's built out to have different scenarios and different motivations, right? On why we're putting them on a drip, to clarify. Maybe our offer was too low. Maybe the timing just wasn't right. Maybe they're going through probate. We can go through and add an automation. It's called a drip campaign to it. That drip campaign is going to automatically send out texts and emails to the seller each, I guess, increment.
Yeah.
I don't know how you describe it, but it changes, right? So what happens is it goes from a human talking to a seller, right? Somebody on our team makes an offer or is having conversations. As it becomes more clear that they're not going to be making a decision in the next 2 months, we move them to what's called warm leads and we put them on a drip campaign. That drip campaign supplements the salesperson, right? So instead of the salesperson calling every other week to stay on top of it, the automated drip campaign sends out messaging as if it were you saying, hey, I know that you didn't like that offer. Here's an article on our website that may give you some help, right? And it's staying in touch with the seller without a salesperson having to think about it. And then every couple tasks, it leads to a phone call from an actual salesperson. Mm-hmm. And then that salesperson may have a conversation, may leave a voicemail, may shoot a Loom video, may leave a text message, but it's in addition to a salesperson, and it can really drastically change the number of leads that one person can manage.
Yeah, the most important key piece that you shared, it being a supplement and not a substitute right? It is something that enhances your follow-up system, but it's never going to replace the person who's making the actual calls. We signed up with OmniDrip. They went into our Re Simpli, our CRM. They set up all of these different drip campaigns, right? What was our track record of success after implementing those in terms of like the feedback we were getting from leads or, revitalizing a lead? I felt like the turnaround was pretty quick.
I think it was 2.5 weeks. We signed a deal in Stockton that made us $90,000.
That's right. I totally forgot that whole tail over in Stockton came from that drip campaign.
It was a lead that we had been talking to. It's a classic example of a person who went ghost on us for 2 or 3 weeks. Most salespeople are going to chalk it up as they're not interested and move them to a dead lead, or they're not going to follow up anymore. We said, let's just put it on a drip. We put it on a drip. 2.5 weeks after putting it on a drip, the lady contacted us, said, I'm ready to sign. We had already done the hard work up front. The drip campaign helped supplement our task. It led to a signed agreement. That escrow dragged out a bit, dealing with some foreclosure stuff. We closed on it. The lady walked away with like $60,000 more than she was expecting, and then we made $90,000.
It's too easy.
Again, the purpose of this specific episode is to talk about just tasks, like the fortunes in the follow-up. A lot of people are going to fall off because they're going to have one really good conversation with Cade. And if Cade doesn't make a decision within the first 2 weeks, shiny object syndrome takes place. And now Jonathan called in. Jonathan wanted an offer. And next thing you know, Cade's posting that he sold his house, right? And you realize, had I just stayed in touch with Cade, I could have probably got the deal because I had a good relationship, right?
Yeah. And then I think one other piece when we're talking about follow-ups and talking about tasks, right? Up until this point, we've been talking about leads up until the point of a signed contract. And then once you get a signed contract, it can be maybe easier for some people to kind of just like set it and, just kind of wait for the escrow process to be finished and either close on it, or if you're assigning it or wholesaling it, that part. But there's also a big piece of follow-up that happens in that escrow timeframe. Not only follow up with the seller, but it's follow up with the escrow company. It's following up with, if you're lining up funding to close on the deal, it's following up with your private money lenders, right? The follow-up process once you're in escrow itself is a whole nother process. And it's easy to set that and forget it because it can feel just as or even more tedious, because technically it's not an income generating activity because the deal's already signed. You need to make sure you're still focusing your time on bringing in new business and not getting muddled in the escrow. But you can't just set and forget. The follow-up processes during escrow are just as important to getting your deal you just signed across the finish line and recouping that money back into the business.
Yeah, we'll talk about that because we've had to really work a lot on that side of it. What happens after we get a signed agreement? What kind of tasks are we tasking out to the team?
Very, very first thing, right? After escrow's opened is we're making a call. If it's yourself, let's just use this example. You're making a call, a courtesy call to the seller, just to let them know, hey, escrow is officially opened. Here's our escrow number. Here's, the escrow officer we're working with. Just wanted to let you know we're officially open. Here's our scheduled close date. Title will be reaching out, to you directly. Here's the phone number they'll be calling from. They may need to collect some information from you. I'll be here. Let me know if you have any questions. Excited to get this across the finish line. So it's that introductory or courtesy call to the seller. It could be someone else on your team. If you're working on a team and you have a transaction coordinator, they're the ones making that call. That's step one. Step two is following up on the escrow side. You need to follow up on what's called the preliminary title report. That's it. That's what's going to tell you if there's any issues, liens, overdue property taxes, child support delinquencies, whatever it is attached to the property. And that's important because you're going to need a clean report if you're looking to go wholesale it, or not necessarily a clean report, but the reason for that report is to make you and the seller aware, are there any issues that are going to hold up to what our original agreement said? So it's following up with the escrow company who generates that title report. So back to back, those two things, in terms of the follow-up process in escrow, very, very important. And I know you guys on the sales team, especially in terms of assigning deals, putting in the earnest money deposit, that preliminary title report is kind of that first domino to fall. Sometimes can take longer than we'd like. That's why it's important to follow up with that. So all the rest of the work after that, finding a buyer or making sure you've got a clean report or going back to negotiate with the seller and say, hey man, Scott, you've got $20,000 in overdue child support. I don't have the flexibility in the deal to take that on and pay it. So how are we going to find a resolve that allows you to still sell this property and walk away cleanly? Those are the two big things.
Yeah. And then I would tag on to that. The last thing to do is after a deal is closed, it's thanking the customer for their business.
Yes.
Setting an expectation if they have any other property that we'd love to help them on those, and potentially collecting a review, right?
Review. And not only that, what people often forget is you close a deal with the seller. That's great that you have this post-closing call, but then you kind of just set that seller and forget. What we don't realize is a lot of the sellers that we're doing business with, especially the class of tired landlords, is they've got more properties. I've got a guy on my phone who I've bought 4 of his deals, and I still follow up with him even though I haven't bought a deal in a year and a half from him, because he has he's got 60 other doors in town, and I know that if I'm spending the time to follow up, that there's going to be more deals that come from that. So with these sellers, if you know they've got other properties, or a family member who's got a property that they mentioned that they're thinking about selling, make sure you don't set and forget those sellers. They need to be a part of the continued follow-up process after you close the deal.
That's it, dude. I feel like we hammered the point. I think at this point, if you've listened this far into the podcast, biggest takeaways: use tasks to your advantage. Don't try to remember every seller. Take diligent notes. Be creative in when you're setting your next task. And if you set it, do it. And if you don't do it, make sure that you move it to the next day and do it the next day. And if you find that you are running low on time, you have too many tasks to do, consider hiring or creating automations in your business to help pick up the slack.
That's it, bro. Re Simpli, you mentioned OmniDrip. That was, I think, a one-time investment into our business that paid dividends right away. Both of those things we can help people get in contact with. We're always here as an open book. Those are the two primary big things that we use for our task automation and follow-up. So any questions you guys have, any interest in learning more about those two things, we've done a ton of trainings. We're here as open books and can help you guys out, whatever you need.
That's it. We'll see you guys next week.